I really love this conversation, Michael, that we dive deep into, not just the technology side, but this larger impact. So if I look at from a pure technology and AI view, narrow view here, sounded like where it is adding value is the fragmented knowledge, like pockets of knowledge today, especially like when in industrial setting, supply chain and all of these entities are very much fragmented but also interconnected. Now, when there's disruption, such as generational disruption comes in, that seems to be AI can play a role, right? And to synthesize that knowledge and then hopefully continue some of these
Yep.
current work, right? So that I view that as a positive side of enabling that. And then when we talked about that, I think you talked about in Asia, that is an issue that younger generation might not take on the previous generations business. And I think there's some of similar situation in the US on the smaller side. There are smaller manufacturers or small, business owners. They retire, right? But then even farmers. I recently heard a story about U.S. farmers. Many generations. But then the children moved on to big cities, right? Become lawyers and accountants. And so I think on the smaller side, it will have very similar situation here in the U.S. as well. It also makes me think that U.S. might even have a little bit more challenge because today we don't have as in-depth knowledge in manufacturing and industrial setting anymore. And the effort to bring it back, we will need that kind of knowledge, right? So that is a different challenge here today.
Yeah. And, I don't want to get too deep into the politics, but for whatever the reasons may have been, the manufacturing base has been hollowed out in the US. And so
Yes.
whether it's in shipbuilding or defense or other areas, it is hard to staff. So, there's
Yes.
a push to build ships in the US, right? It's going to be very hard to get people into the
It's
shipyard.
hard to get
We have
people.
problems in Korea, right? We're bringing in workers from elsewhere because we don't have enough people to do the work at the shipyards.
Not
right?
only that, right? It's also we don't have that surrounding supporting, as you were saying, subcontractors and
The whole ecosystem is
whole
necessary.
ecosystem, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. We need the people building cells. Well, maybe not cells at this point, but we need the people to build, right, the engines. We need people to have even pipes. I was hearing about the shipyards we're talking about, right? They need all of these different kind of components, not like from just the
You
shipyard.
need to be able to call somebody
You have
and have
to
it
have
delivered. Yeah.
exactly. So I think that is a complex, and then we also lost a lot of know-how as well. So yeah, it's interesting. I think in this time of looking at the having your view from APAC as well of that difference it is in this industry and how AI plays a role in that is very interesting.
Yeah. And if I may say so, what Doge has taught us is that things are more complicated than they may seem to very smart, quantitatively inclined folks that may be, very bright and able to think out of the box and look for efficiencies in data, but it's a lot more complicated than that, right? It's a lot more complicated than simply looking for efficiencies in data flow. And so
we are
that's the difficulty.
yeah. And at the end, it's we're a society. We have a social fabric that's held up by human relationship. So it's just data is not enough, right?
And so, again, if I may go back into the Asian context, and this is also applicable elsewhere, but for the companies that I know, our companies in Asia have been run in kind of a feudal governance mode, right? Where people do what they're told. It's owner centric, and whether the owner actually holds an outright majority or not, there is an owner for each enterprise, or there's usually a family, and so the organizations are very much managed to accommodate them, right? And so the executives are looking at them and looking for signals to keep them happy, the owners, right? Because that's, at the end of the day, risk management for a lot of these folks was risk managing their own careers as opposed for the enterprise. And so this also occurred in a history of where we optimized for risk vis-a-vis our own government, as opposed to the market, because the government was kind of the leader and participant in a lot of these build outs. So what happens? We have organizations that are very much organized for the principal agent relationship in a feudal way where, there's a lord, and then there's like a liege lord, and everybody follows. Um, and so in addition to the generation change where younger folks are not putting up with that, um, we also have the problem of, in Asia, we had tacit or implicit controls for GRC, governance, risk management, and compliance. In Korean, it's called nunchi. There are
Okay.
there are other words in other languages, but it's basically a situational awareness of signals and implicit kind of unhappiness signals or signals to stand down. These were not explicit governance controls. It was culture for a lot of these
Okay.
companies, right? So fine, if that's the way we've had the Asian miracle of building out the companies, it worked. The problem is not only we don't have the young people who are going to play that game anymore. For agents, for AI agents, you cannot expect them to figure it out implicitly. You have to
Mm,
give them explicit instructions. Culture is not going to be implicitly downloaded to these models for workflows, right? So the controls that we had, because we could tell that our senior vice president was not happy with something, or they actually yelled at us for something, it was not actually in the work uh, GRC, right? It's all culture, right? And that stuff is not going to work with these agents. Similarly, those folks that are used to managing in that way, where they could sit and be very happy issuing instructions to what we call the working level in Asia, which I always thought was an ironic term, because what is that? What are the executives doing if they're not doing the work? So the working level, which doesn't really have kind of authority, but they get all the work delegated to them. Information flows up, not down. All of these problems in traditional organizational culture and GRC are going to be overwhelmed now as we try to accommodate AI. So agentic workflows will need to be explicitly managed.
So I I grew up in Asia, so I kind of know. I did not work in Asia per se, so but growing up, I think I know what Michael you're talking about. So of the working culture and how we assess the signal during work, right? Part of, like, for example, I know Asia, a lot of business is done at the dinner table, right? At the banquet table. There's a lot of socializing
And knowledge
after,
transfer,
and there's a
right?
lot of knowledge transfer. There's a lot of signaling, right, in those situations. And AI agents, are you saying that switching from that to a AI agents model is going to create a gap, or what?
It's
What
going to
are
be
we?
brutal. So let me go back
Okay, what are we talking
way
about
way
here?
back to 91. So I was an analyst for an investment bank, and every employee in the company had a little stamp, a chop that you would stamp for decisions that were made. So you would have, my level, and then the level above it, and about 8 levels of people that
I
had to
see.
approve things, and you all had a little
Right.
stamp, right? You just didn't sign it.
Yeah.
Now it's all digital, but it's the same idea.
Right.
The people who stamp things aren't really authorizing anything, right? It's just fingerprinting this stuff that it goes up so that
Mm.
responsibility can be diffused downward when stuff goes wrong, when
Interesting.
stuff goes
Yes.
badly,
Okay.
right? They're like, well, you
Yeah.
stamped it, and
Okay.
the
Yeah.
responsibility will not gravitate towards the top in these organizations. The credit will gravitate towards the top. But if things go badly, you have a lot of people that have stamped this thing that you
Yeah.
can
Yes.
blame, right?
Definitely. I
And
see. Yes.
so if you have an agentic
Interesting.
system that looks at this organizational workflow, it looks like there is responsibility and delegation and oversight, human in the loop and otherwise, but it's just not true. It was a culture that was optimized for this feudal governance regime, uh, way of doing things. And so if you start deploying agentic AI into this, one, there will be an overwhelming set of documents and stamps that come up to the executive level, the variances, right? They're not used to that pace of problems, because they had this whole buffer system built in. And so you have 50 something year old executives that used to deal with a thing, maybe once a week, are now looking at, 10 things waiting for them when they show up in the morning, right? They are not used to this because they've been coddled by this feudal governance structure. So it is going to be very difficult for these organizations to adjust to the machine, speed, using these
Interesting.
governance systems that relied on culture to figure things out and sift it and shift responsibility.
Very
Now it's
interesting.
becoming too clear. It's
Yeah, it
becoming too
is. That's
clear for
correct.
the
We
humans.
don't
Yeah.
want that.
Yeah.
We don't want. I
And
mean,
then
they don't want
and so what
that.
happens then is organizations will
Yes.
sabotage, right?
Very interesting.
Will sabotage. So I know one financial institution, a large one, that has a lot of AI deployed, and they have deployed it, typically for algorithms and trading and so on. So they have a lot of
Okay.
experience with machine learning. Agentic is something different. Generative
Yeah.
is something different. And their compliance folks are just hanging on for retirement. They don't want to deal with this,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
It's too
Right.
painful for them. They've
Yes.
had a very nice job to date, working with the
Yes.
regulators and having the annual bankers dinners and so on, and reporting to a rubber stamp board with the political appointee that is, the chairman. This is, how it works. And so these people who are my age cohort, right? They're like, oh, please, just not on my watch. Have the next person deal
Yeah,
with it.
just have the
And so
next.
they're resisting this. Same thing with
Yeah.
law
Yeah.
firms, right? Law firms are also resisting the efficiency gains because the billing model is premised on selling a lot of time. So the senior partners are like, geez, just not on my watch, right? The efficiency
Interesting.
gains it directly challenge, how they succeeded.
So do you think this gives the U.S. companies an advantage in this area or
Yeah, I
in
think
in the
that's
AI
historically been
era?
the case, right? So Silicon Valley and the mindset of challenging the status quo, kind of this you know change catalyst. That is the advantage of the U.S. I think that it's not a blanket statement, because for certain things like industrial manufacturing, right? I think in fact China is probably much more resilient, much more adaptive, much more flexible. Um, and it will be able to accommodate, and is actually accommodating, integrating AI much more effectively for this type of stuff. Korea, Japan, not our strengths,
Mm.
and that
Okay. Yeah.
worries me. So this is ironic given that we make a lot of chips and so on, but those are
Mm-hmm.
those are actually labor light industries, right?
Yeah.
It's not like
Yeah.
shipbuilding.
China is very pragmatic, I think, in AI and in a lot of the technology today. And I think, yeah, it's interesting how even within APAC, there's quite some difference, right? So very interesting. Yeah, no, this has been a very interesting conversation that touches on so many levels of social context as well.